Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú
The Ashen Forge. The Ashen Forge.
Hello and welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin. How are you two doing?
Great.
Doing good.
It's been 2 weeks. Not a lot really happened in 2 weeks, but we got stuff to talk about. Tank, I guess that's what's Friday. We get to experience the tank.
The tank. The tank.
Yes, Frank the Tank.
So, tanks versus fighters.
Well, I think it's awesome because we haven't seen tanks before.
Yeah. And so that's exactly what I'm kind of looking to see. We've seen what a fighter's like. What's a tank do? How are they different?
Yeah.
Why would I play one or the other?
How would we know what a tank does? You know, that must mean that we're really close to Alpha 2 because seeing something totally new.
Well, that turned that direction much faster than I thought it would. I assumed that is where this would end up, that the first show of 2023 is on the tank, not crafting, not the next iteration of nodes, not, well, I don't know. But it is something different. As you said, we've not seen the tank. I can't imagine.
We don't know how different it's going to be. We have seen the tank. I hope they at least do something like actually explain some augments. What are they going to show that we haven't seen?
They're probably going to show us what abilities are specific to the tank.
Haven't we seen that already? I'm pretty sure
I thought we played the fighters, not tanks. Did we play tanks?
Fighter is the one that's new.
So if the tank is the one we played before, what they could show this time is everything they've changed about it. They got a lot of feedback about all the abilities from Alpha 1. It might not have even been the tank they specifically thought. It's like, all right, this is perfect. But yeah, we've got these abilities and they work and we can kind of put them all on one character in a kit. So we'll call this the tank. It could be that some of the abilities we used in Alpha 1 are actually separated from, some being tank and some being fighter. And so the ones that'll be swapped out are probably the more fightery abilities and they'll be replaced by more tanky abilities. Which ones those will be, I don't know. I think the one where you hook someone and pull them in, though, is definitely more of a fighter thing and not a tank thing. On one hand, someone could say...
No. That's definitely a tank thing. That's their version of threat.
Well, that's what I was going to say. On one hand, it's the, I gotcha, come here sort of thing. But on the other hand, I kind of associate that with the fighter in that they're using it as part of an entry or a damage chaining sort of thing, that it's just one of the things that goes along their sequence of attacks. It could be, if an enemy does a jump back, they use that to close the distance, or they'll have a dash that they use to close the distance or something.
Yeah, fighter has dash. We know that. That's the main ability or maybe it's called rush. That's the main ability. That's like the one thing we know that you can put an augment on top of.
Well, we'll see. We'll see which ones from Alpha 1 remain and what gets swapped out and how they work differently. I think another thing I want to know is how attributes and your gear change the expression of the use of each one. Like, if you've got way higher constitution, is that going to make one ability more powerful or effective than another one differentially, or does it affect it at all?
They are not going to talk about gear stats. They are not going to talk about adventurer stats. That's not going to happen.
Because they're still
Why not?
discussing it. They don't know what they want to do yet. That would be my guess.
They're gonna show us some changes to the abilities. I'm almost positive nothing got swapped out. Um, but we'll see some changes to abilities, and that's supposed to be cool. I mean, isn't that what happened with cleric? Haven't we seen cleric as well? I feel like
Yeah,
we've
we
seen
saw
cleric.
all. Yeah, I mean, we've seen new stuff. What from cleric, from the ranger? I mean, we've seen.
hmm Ranger and fighter are new, but I think cleric is not new, and I think tank is not going to be very new either.
Well, if it's worth showing off again, then I would imagine something's different.
Something's different. Feels like it's going to be filler, similar to cleric, but we'll see.
We'll see.
I wish talking about the tank. I'm curious how much variability there will be within the secondary classes, right? So you look at all the questions that have been posted for this, and this is a traditional sort of meat shield, but I think back to some of the earlier MMOs. I playing EverQuest, for example. I mean, you could have a tank that was just largely based on avoidance. You didn't have to have a meat shield. They just didn't get hit very often, and that could still suffice for the tank. Or mages had pets that could tank to a degree, right? I would much rather see a broad range, a monk sort of tank where you're just hard to hit. But I doubt we'll get to see much of anything other than the traditional style tank.
In this
Friday.
demo,
Yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
So you mentioned it not being close to Alpha 2. Is there something yeah, like I said, I wish we would be seeing some of the, you mentioned augments, some of the more interesting aspects, right? We've seen tanks and all kinds of, the traditional classes.
So the big thing that they should do for this tank demo is reveal the new name for tank.
There's a new name.
You think there's going to be a new name?
No, but I don't think so, but within the last month, there have been 2 threads asking for the name to be changed.
Why?
So
What's wrong? Why?
it comes up all the
But
all the
why?
time, but
What's the rationale?
uh,
I'm curious.
because tank is a Trinity role. It's not a real class, right? So it's stupid to call. You might as well call something DPS. Why don't you call something DPS? That should be a
As there's
no-brainer.
multiple DPSs.
Well, to be fair, I can see the point. There's multiple tanks, right? So again, going back to the sort of class model EverQuest, you had Shadow Knights, you had Paladins, you had a traditional warrior. I mean, you had a lot of variability in sort of a tank, and that has been pretty well shrunk down. What is it in World of Warcraft now? So you have your warrior, you have your. Do you still have the bear druid? Is that still viable tank?
Yeah, yeah.
What
Yep.
else is there?
I don't know. I don't think about roles like that. I'm not doing combat roles.
I think
really-
Death Knight, right? DK was.
I want to play a druid. I don't care really what where you think I've fallen for DPS or tank or healer. I just want to play a druid, right? So I'm not a gamer who's trying to play a game. I'm a role player who's trying to play a fantasy role in a fantasy novel. But when I think of a tank, I'm gonna think of something that's in heavy armor and hits kind of hard, does a lot of damage. Something closer to a real tank. So I don't mind having a role similar to druid or fighter or magic user, mage or tank. That's all fine.
Well, hopefully with some of the secondary classes, we will get to have sort of the SK, the Shadow Knight, the Paladin, the
Mm-hmm.
more avoidance type
Mm-hmm.
tank. There were some questions on this in the forums, and one I'm curious. So it said, do you think a skilled tank should be able to prevent all damage from hitting other party members, or should there be situations that no matter how skilled you are, the party will take some damage? For example, positioning, interrupting, use of skills, and cooldowns. I guess that goes to what is the purpose of the tank?
That seems to me like saying, can a cleric prevent all damage? Can they have so much heal so well that their team members never get damaged? What?
They would
That
heal
doesn't
all
make any sense.
damage. They wouldn't prevent all damage.
Whatever form of mitigation it is, it brings up the question: are you trying to have them be a focal point of enemy damage that isn't where everybody else is necessarily standing, or do they need to be closer to the group because they're trying to shield the whole group instead of just being the one who's taking the damage and keeping the attention? And both could be viable. Both could be ways that you have to play the tank. That's the I think there's room for it. It just need to be contextualized. Why you would be shielding the group? Is there an ability? Is it your equipment that allows you to do that? Like what's the feature of it? Is it because you've got a tower shield and anybody can use a tower shield, but tower shield plus tank gives you some better synergy or something?
I think just like you're not going to be expecting uh, mage to do all the damage, you should not be expecting a tank to prevent all damage. That's ludicrous. The job of a tank is not to prevent all damage to, to the party. That's not a realistic goal.
No, basically you're just a customer support rep that's trying to reroute all the other lines to you, so you're the only one taking the abuse, not the rest of the company. But
Most
that's
most of the
most of it.
abuse, anyway. Most
Yeah,
of the
yeah. Some of the other stuff, and that's definitely then the other question: if you're trying to have one of each primary in a group of 8 that's going into a dungeon for whatever sort of thing, um, who do you expect is going to manage the ads? Is it going to be big baddies on the tank, and then two or three other classes have to kind of figure out how to manage the 2 or 3 ad groups that come in? Or how what's going to be the expectation if it's 2 or 3 big baddies? You only have one tank, they're going to spike damage the tank down real quick, so you're going to have to spread it out. But if you're expected to bring one of each class, then the one of each archetype, then you're expecting that there's going to be at least a couple other people with some solutions, whether it's a fighter or maybe a ranger with some sort of pet. Maybe summoners can bring something up that helps take some blows. Even if it's just a dummy that comes up and you just whack it and it just puts out aggro. I think shamans in WoW had a totem like that. That's even something like that would be kind of an interesting way. And instead of trying to have it just be one thing that you're then sitting there and healing, the idea that it takes a few hits and it pops and you're supposed to just keep recasting it in different places to keep one of them distracted. I could see something like that as more of an inventive way to have somebody handle one of the large ads in a situation like that.
I really hope. I would love to see. I don't think this will probably happen, but yeah, it's probably just pulling back to old experiences, but the idea of a Templar being a tank, like I would love to have the ability, because I just love that class in EverQuest 2, but to put on a shield, have a mace, you get to wear heavy armor as a Templar, so you have the AC and the at least mitigation. You don't have the avoidance, but you're able to take somewhat of a beating and still throw out heals. Would be a very fun class to play.
Mhm. Yeah, I was going to say that we should keep in mind that even when you have your Guardian, which is a tank, um, going into that dungeon, the 7 other members of your group could all be secondary tanks, and so all be off tanking.
I was thinking that would be a good name. They could swap those. The tank is actually, or the Guardian, or excuse me, the tank now would be the new tank, and you use Guardian as the actual name for tank. That would make more sense.
It, tank makes sense. People just don't like it. It's kind of like mage, right?
I don't.
Everybody in Ashes is a magic user.
I don't
Everybody is
think.
a fighter.
I don't think of
Everybody.
like an M1 Abrams like a main battle tank when I think of a fantasy setting, though. Like that's where the context and stuff is a little weird to call them a tank. Like, okay, do we have like what other tanks are there? Are there Roland tanks? Are there septic tanks? Like what else
Right?
would be called a
And
tank that's
and
there to take abuse?
what is common about all the things called tank?
They hold
Encased
stuff.
with metal, with
Yeah.
metal. Uh-huh. So heavily armored is a tank to me. I mean, it's not that
Yeah.
big of a stretch.
That's how I would view that. Yeah, when I see the word tank, I'm just thinking more of what they're wearing, kind of the damage,
Hmm.
the abuse they're able to take than anything,
Hmm. Hmm.
versus like a lighter mobility car or something
Hmm.
else, a Jeep that they're using out on
Hmm.
the field. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
but slower to move.
Hmm.
But I'm saying, does this game universe have the idea of a tank, a metal encased thing in that manner?
It should, because that's where the name for the armored vehicle came from, is big metal thing that's difficult to damage.
Okay, propane tank.
Yeah,
Actually, I kind of like that propane tank using fire-based attacks.
right.
Augments and secondary classes. What's going to be 64 of them? Well, I guess 8 for tank, but there's another one. These questions always. I guess I understand this. So will tanks have some form of stances to increase damage dealt, but have less defense in return? If there's one thing I dislike about current MMORPGs, it's tanks not being able to hold their own in solo gameplay, because it takes 10 years to kill one mob. I don't know.
Well, the
Really?
point of being in a tank, would be you can take the blows, and it takes however long to kill the thing. That's your trade-off. You have mitigation at the max and damage at about the midpoint. If you want to maximize the fact that you're a tank, maybe roll with another person. Maybe
Well,
go out there with a pet that you paid a lot for that does a lot of bitey scratchy damage.
there's plenty you can do with your secondary archetype. There's plenty that you can do with your passive skills, probably even your weapon type. Um, there should be plenty you can do. Any race can play any class. So um, you could pick a race that is more maneuverable, maybe, or maybe what you want to do is pick a race that is going to hit the hardest. Um, and you also will have augments from social orgs, and you have racial augments, you have um, religious augments. There's all kinds of way to do more damage if you want to do more damage. I don't think we need to add another mechanic when we haven't even tested the ones that are already in the design. We got tons of ways, I think, to add more damage if you want to be a tank that tanks but also does more damage or focuses on damage while you're tanking.
Now, I could see stances being applied in a different manner if you want to have a combat stance where you aren't as mobile, but you're also a lot harder to knock back. That you're, keeping more balance and more grounded, so you can, stay in the thick of things and not get knocked around or whatever. Be more defensive, but at the same time, being able to go to a more mobile version, kind of the default version, where, you're moving at normal speed, but you're taking the normal amount of hits and lack of whatever defenses. I don't know if you block while you're running, for example. Of course, that could be a fun thing for tanks, that they're the only ones who can run with their shield up.
There's gear stats for that, and passive skills for that.
It's just this question does seem to come up though, because here was another one later on. How much damage can a cleric and tank do if they go full DPS compared to a DPS archetype? It's like, well, this is where you should have an alt, I guess. Like if you're a tank, I feel like you're specifically filling a role, right? You're doing something specific to a group. The same for healer.
Well, but kind of similar to your take on the game overall. I love to make builds that go against the mold. So, I want to have a Vec. Well, I was thinking Vec when they were still at Orc. So, Vec these days. So, I would love to have not a Nakua, Vec and Renkai. I would love to have a Renkai rogue, right? A big hulky guy who you would not expect to be great at stealth, but is great at stealth because that's possible in a high magic fantasy setting. So you should be able to make a cleric that can do right decent DPS. I would not expect them to out DPS a rogue though.
Yeah, people just seem to get confused as to what they want to do. This is not even going down the whole argument of this is a group game, not a solo game.
Well,
It could be that they do find solo damage, but the other classes do the same amount of damage to a larger amount of enemies. So, yeah, you can spec your tank to do DPS on the same level as DPS, but not in the same quantity and ease of use. That could be the other sort of way that it goes. Sure, oh yeah, you can hit as hard as our hardest hitter over here. Great, but he's going to swing 3 times as fast when he does that thing where he spins around in a circle and does a whirlwind of death. So great, you can hit like him, kinda.
Lots of people want to be the Mary Sue, who are great at everything.
Mary Sue.
And then Mary Sue, it might only be a Star Trek reference. It's based off of a fan fiction writer for Star Trek who made herself the I think she was even just an ensign or something like that, but she was great at everything and everybody loved her. As the main character, she could do anything and everybody on the ship loved her. So it's a big fan fiction term. You'll use it in terms of, when you're writing for TV shows and stuff like that too. But everybody there are people who want to be great at everything and loved by everyone playing the game. Also, you have those people who will play clerics, they'll spec as cleric, but they spend most of their time trying to damage everything because that's what people want is DPS. And you don't get a lot of when you're looking at the leaderboards at the end, it's all DPS. Healing isn't as favored as who did the most DPS.
That's how you get into a group. It's
people will forget. Yeah, but you've got your players who stand in the fire and some just sit there banging on them, forget they're supposed to be healing people. You know.
So here was a good question, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier that I hope they do, um, which is if you choose tank as your secondary archetype, will you still have taunt and be able to fulfill the tank role? And I hope the
Say that
answer.
again.
If you choose tank as your secondary archetype, will you still have a taunt
Oh,
and be able to fulfill the tank role? So I'd have to go through their 64, but I guess if you're a mage and secondary was a tank, are you going to be a viable tank?
I
uh,
think it's going to add defensive and or um, aggro management abilities to the existing abilities that you've got, not giving you tank skills. I'm pretty sure that's the way they said it, that it's not going to give you the other archetype skills. It's going to give you the ability to utilize their augments to your own existing skills for that class, for your primary.
right. So you will still primarily be your primary archetype. You will be able to dabble some in the stuff that the other archetypes do. Uh, don't expect to out tank a primary archetype tank. That's the main thing. Who asked that question? Who asked that question?
Ooh, I don't. Let me look. Stalwart.
Okay. Somebody I haven't seen ask the question before. Yeah. Uh, you should be able to do pretty good as a tank, but in an 8-person group that has a primary archetype tank, don't expect to be able to out tank the primary archetype tank.
And of course, another good question, when it comes down to more physics based, which is will there be clipping through enemy players, or will tanks be able to tactically position themselves to body block enemies? Actually, there's a second question here. Also, will tanks have a guard ability that can be placed on an ally? I shouldn't have asked that question. Second question. You're not going to get the first one answered. Not going to get any of them answered.
Uh-oh. Well, the second one I think goes back to what we were saying earlier about protecting, the entire party from damage. Maybe you can like cover a couple of people and reduce the incoming damage to some extent. Positionally, it might be a thing, sure. And which one was the first question again?
You're gonna make me go all the way back. It was will there be clipping? So essentially, is there a physics base? So you're able to body block?
I think the answer that they've been giving for that is we are looking into what we're going to be able to do given large scale latency concerns. Because with all those moving parts all at once, it could be that trying to add that collision is going to absolutely break everything in a big clustered melee. So that's not going to be viable. Or it could be that they are able to do a simplified enough way to have like a blocky, players blocking other players sort of collision, and it will actually have some viability. It's not likely going to be the normal colliders. I'm guessing it's going to be the most dumbed down, like expanded capsule specifically for players colliding with other players. Players colliding with enemy combatant players specifically.
Oh, come on! You got to leave it in for friendly people too. Just make a big mess of it. That'd be fun. You have to pay attention to not just the circles on the ground, but the people around you.
No, you can move through your party without spending extra movement. You just can't stop in the same square as them. It's tabletop rules.
Yeah. Position though. Position matters.
Yes.
Um,
Tabletop rules. By the way, anybody, just a quickie, the OGL draft that they showed, womp womp, so bad. Ain't buying it.
Yeah.
Just make another system or play a different system. There's many of them out there.
Tell you what, 1.2 now? Like,
Yeah, it's the 1.2 draft.
yeah. And everybody, Like, didn't they? Sorry, this is a side note, but it wasn't it like they said, oh, well, you won't. They like changed the definition of a word. They tried to say, look, it means, we have a wording here. It's like the license couldn't be revoked or something, but then they actually changed the definition of it later on. So I don't know.
There's been a lot of screwy business and them trying to cover their backs and gaslight and edit live posts right before our eyes where we have editions of the things they've been posting to see what they've been trying to do for damage control. It's just a mess. First thing Hasbro could probably do is swap out the executive leadership, because this ain't the way, and it's not going to be recoverable anytime soon.
And here's a question from one neurotoxin: in a lore-approved mechanical way, how or why can a tank stand their ground and not get crushed into a splatter? Mark, when a 20-ton monster overhead smashes straight down onto them.
What's the answer? Posted in chat.
Oh, I gotta find it. You're talking about the this here.
Oh, somebody answered
You
it.
got it.
That answer, because magic.
Magic.
Yes, of course. I mean, I can understand for some game worlds why you can shoot massive tank cannons or a giant orbital laser and it doesn't deform the world whatsoever. Sure, there's a context that can support those for the game I'm thinking of, but the footsteps left by that Cyclops that's walking along and knocking the trees over would be some giant divots. They would really mess up the entire terrain anywhere they step. And I'm sure it'd get real boggy when those footsteps fill in with water on a rainy day.
Unless they're a giant who is a rogue.
No, I would imagine there's certain weight that it doesn't matter how soft your step is, it's gonna make a dent.
Rogues use magic.
Okay, well, it's whatever magic they can use to be softer than dropping a bowling ball from 5 feet, which will make a dent, but somehow something much bigger and heavier can spread their weight across.
They can erase their footsteps. They can effectively be gliding. They could be right. They don't have to be.
Okay,
gravity might not be.
I'll give you that.
In the way you're expecting. They could be immaterial, intangible to some degree. There's all kinds of stuff that could happen magically.
But we know this Cyclops isn't a rogue because they knock over trees along the way.
Have we seen them do that?
They've told us that mechanic is to be looked out for more than once.
Yeah. So some will.
Some will.
Some will probably not.
Wait. I don't even know. I don't know if there's a plural. Like the son of Poseidon is a singular. It's not that Poseidon's only got one son, but the Cyclops.
That's right.
There's not a lot of other tank questions mixed into these. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about with the tank. Otherwise, I can just sort of.
For me, I want to know: are you going to have to don the cloth if you want to be a magic tank? How does magic tanking work? Are you going to be able to block magic with your shield? Can you evade a magic attack? If a lightning bolt comes through your direction, can you just, do the one where the guy dodges to the side and, the shot just goes straight past where he used to be, sort of thing? Like how's that going to work?
You can wear whatever armor you want.
Yeah, you can wear whatever armor you want, but what's going to be the thing that facilitates tanking against magical abilities and effects?
Wearing some gear that mitigates magic.
So, cloth and leather?
You can wear both.
I'm sure there'll be enchants.
It's really physical armor versus magic armor, right? So
Well, it's like a physical, magical, and then there's the leather is the sort of blend. But then I guess the other question with that is there another sort of layer to it? Is the leather more like evadey? Is um the plate more just damage mitigation, and then the cloth would be um what, magic evasion or mitigation or something? I don't know.
yeah, and then what is the cloth made out of? What kind of enchantments have you put on the cloth? You know, that's how you get bikini armor.
Yeah. Well, it's that's one of the things that I'm kind of interested to see is how the actual ability and usage with the armors kind of plays out with the sort of light, medium, and heavy that they've kind of loosely defined things in. And then, I honestly don't know how like really heavily defined they're going to be if skills and abilities will reference must be cloth or light, must be medium, or leather must be, heavy or plate, or if those sort of labels will actually not end up being a thing and there's, more of a range and continuum of how much, magic versus physical. You've got, maybe your 50-50, your 60-40, your 75-25, your plate that's all the way at like 90-10.
Yeah, speaking of which, I've been playing World of Warcraft the last couple of weeks. Prior to that, I was in rehearsal for a dance performance that ended on the 7th, and I went to my 40th high school reunion um, last weekend. So since then, I've been playing World of Warcraft and trying to get my alt Taylor up to 70 because I want to check out the crafting, and I've made some cloth items that I can't wear until I'm level 70. Um, I was just going to try and keep her like around close to 60 and not level her to 70, but I can't wear the stuff that I'm making, so there's no point in keeping her low. Um, Specializations so far look pretty intriguing in World of Warcraft Dragonflight. I'm choosing a specialization path that will let me specialize in cloth armor making, especially combat armor making, I think. Um, I kind of hope Ashes of Creation takes a look at what Dragonflight is doing with their crafting specializations. Not that they would do something super similar, but just to get some ideas, if they don't already have great ones, for how the specializations can go. I don't think I've seen anything like in Dragonflight before. So,
Well, back no to your, you're talking focusing on armor. I even wonder about again different types of tanks. So could you be more viable as if you had some sort, Shadow Knight would use magic, right? That's yes, they wear heavy armor, have a shield, but they also have various magical abilities that you would not find in, say, your warrior tank. And your paladin might have some limited as well. But so could there also be just some variability in that secondary augmentation so that tonight we're going to a different dungeon, the boss has a lot of magical output rather than physical, so you do take a different tank for that purpose.
Yeah, I could see something like that, or it could either be a different way to spec a tank, or it could be potentially an alternative that allows like a rogue or a fighter to be able to do some tanking. Would be maybe you're going up against an opponent that they don't necessarily use magic attacks, but they just have a lot of armor penetration that they, either it's a debuff or otherwise, that they have low defense, but they put out a high amount of damage and render your defenses fairly weakened. So the way that you end up tanking them is equipping weapons that have like a life drain sort of thing. So you're getting your, 5 to 10% from a sword, a ring, maybe one other item. And because they have giant health pools, but they have minimal defense, you're putting solid blows in and you're able to heal up the damage that you're taking from them. And that's kind of the way it would work out. That seems like the sort of way that could be viable. When you said Shadow Knight, I was kind of thinking like, well, don't they use like life drain abilities and stuff like that? Isn't that part of how they survive? So, I could see that. And really, for anybody that has some sort of ability to leverage life drain, that sort of situation where debuffs that render your defenses weakened but allow you to, fight back by taking their defenses down and then, doing a bunch of damage back and draining, that, that could be something, entire dungeons based around that sort of concept.
What are you thinking a Shadow Knight would be? What primary archetype, secondary archetype configuration are you expecting the Shadow Knight to be in Ashes?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it would be almost. It's a good question. Almost like the reverse of a necromancer, I guess, because the Shadow Knight, the necromancer
Is
would
it
be soft and have a tank undead, but then the opposite, because SK typically would also have some sort of pet along with them, but they were the
are you
bulk.
are you thinking a Shadow Knight would be a tank rogue or a rogue tank? What
No, they
or
aren't
a
rogues. I
tank
mean, there's no hidden.
or tank? Well, that's where you get your shadow stuff from. You mean so
Well,
like a
then
tank
yes,
mage?
but
A, a
a tank
tank
mage
mage?
in a way. I mean that they
Uh-huh.
I would put that more than
Death
rogue.
school?
Yes.
No,
Yeah,
well,
like
right.
a
So
necromancer type.
death school. Okay.
Yeah,
Um
they were hella fun to play in EverQuest. I can tell you that. But
um yeah, so
it,
that would be the interesting thing to me as a crafter is how impenetrable can I enchant my cloth? Right? What type of cloth can I make that is impervious to swords?
yeah,
Kevlar, split the difference. Weave metal into your fabric.
I'm saying, right? We got that in Lord of the Rings.
but this
Mithril.
this whole conversation also reminded me of another post. The post was not related to a tank. It was an idea of what they called a mage hunter, but the idea was, you saw that I'm sure, was that as a mage hunter you would have a, gosh, this is kind of convoluted to understand. You essentially would cap your mana, and you would, but which would allow you to cap the mage's mana. So if I have a pool of 100 and I limit myself to 10, then the opponent also is limited to 10 mana, which would then conceivably reduce what they could cast or do. That could almost fit into this idea of a tank, a different model of a tank, being able to prevent magic damage by literally just not letting it actually happen. Of course, a tank isn't going to have mana, so I don't know that wouldn't work.
Yeah, they will. That's how you cast javelin. All of them. All everything we've seen so far uses essence. And they have that big glowy weapon effect um for some of their uh skills. So yeah, that's the thing about trying to be a mage hunter is that technically everybody, all the primary archetypes are mages to some degree. Um,
It would be an interesting way to fight. And when I started reading that post, I thought, this sounds kind of convoluted, but I was like, oh wait, no, that kind of starts to make sense. It's a model or a process that I can't think of any example in any MMORPG at least. So
EverQuest Next had an ability called Unsummon in their design, and I was hoping to make my character, at least one, be the master unsummoner and just maximize unsummoning as far as you could go. And that would be my primary role is to go into places and unsummon all the stuff that summoners summon. Um, so yeah, it could be interesting to see what kind of opposing um, classes we can make, or opposing builds that are specifically designed to undo or outclass what our opposites are.
Well, let's see what else is there we can go break into. Here's a question on do you need to PvP flag to loot other players' loot that they drop on death? I hope the answer to this is yes.
Maybe.
I guess there's more.
I think it depends on where you are. Mm.
Well, I
And I
guess
think you just drop loot. A lot of times you can just pick up whatever's dropped.
Well, as we played in Alpha 1, it was just any normal loot bag, but I don't know that that'll be the case when they've got the whole system implemented.
and I
Yeah, I
guess
think my understanding is you just drop it. You don't. It's not. If you drop it, anybody can pick it up. So it's a scramble.
yeah. I mean, now I'm also in my head starting to think. Well, I guess a question would be: did you kill them? Is it somebody that you stumbled upon that was killed by a non-player character? I guess there's a lot of ways to answer that question or interpret that question. I was thinking of it more from a PvP perspective. If I was killed, do you have to be the one that killed me to loot me, or can anyone come up and loot me? And if anyone can come up and loot me, do they have to be flagged in order to do so?
I don't think so, and I think that's the same for like caravans, but caravans are a little different. Well, because I think, huh, that might be a good question to confirm and clarify if people who did not flag for caravans can pick up what was dropped if the caravan is destroyed. And as far as I know, that should be possible. But mm,
So you're gonna have people just following along just to see. Like, all right, I'm not gonna participate, but I'm gonna see what happens here. I might be able to get something out of it.
Well, they might just get ganked there on the spot.
Yeah, Terran, I thought that was the same too. It says I thought players had to be flagged for caravan loot.
I don't think they've specified that. It just drops and it's a scramble to get, but I don't think they've clarified that you have to be flagged for it in order to pick up the loot.
Which actually, speaking of caravans, there was another question. I think you've participated in every single one of these things, Diggs, to some degree, because you're on the forums all the time. But there was another a statement more than a question about caravans. Like, what's the incentive to actually defend a caravan?
Hmm.
That clearly attacking them, clear reward. You get something out of it. But what is the reason to defend? A lot of the answers were, well, this you have friend like your guild, they should just want to do this, or you should hire people to do this. I think that's a folly to think that you're going to have a big group of people that you can go hire to do this. I'm sure there'll be some, but without some sort of incentive.
I think it's that you participate, or the increase in your ranking and standings as a caravan defender, which will give you more jobs and contracts and opportunities down the road, as well as whatever caravan you're helping get from point A to point B is likely of some worth and importance to some part of the kingdom or its vassals. And so even if it's not necessarily the place that you're living and working with, if it's a caravan that is going to places that you deal with and work with, then it might be a good idea to protect it anyway.
Yeah, so the resources you want get to where they need to be, so you can get the gear that you want, or they can build up to get the services that you want. Because if they don't get there, you won't be able to take advantage of those places. Um, so
I could
that is a
also
very big part of it.
I could also see something where opportunities you don't know could possibly occur through gameplay won't open up until you've defended a certain number of caravans that you don't otherwise have a vested interest in. And after you've done it 20 times, why, you might come across the Rogue Caravan event where you might change things in a big way. You can help them. You can maybe not attack them yourself. You can bring people to attack them. You can report them to the local authorities and have, get some NPC assistance, something like that. But you don't get that opportunity until you've, done a bunch of defenses that you didn't necessarily have, a particular stake in. That's the other side of things. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what might trigger some sort of event. So if you think defending caravans is the thing your character would do, then golly, that's what you're going to do. There's your incentive. If you don't have any other incentive, you don't want to rank up with anything, you don't care about, helping the area and getting resources, you're doing something else to begin with, which is, likely if you're coming across a random caravan, it might not be worth it. Just let it go. Go do something else. It's fine. You are already doing something else. No biggie.
Yep. Defending stuff is fun anyway. Same as exploring.
Your reward might be that you say you're going to defend it, but then you tell all of your friends, hey, there's this caravan here. Come bust it. I'm going to run away when the fighting starts.
Mm-hmm.
Here was a question. I don't know if this was real, meaning it was a real question or just to to irritate people. It's from Talents, who I think has been around for quite a while. I don't know, Diggs, if you've had any.
I know Talents,
Yeah.
yep.
Will the areas around world bosses be PvP zones similarly to how the open ocean or the ruins of a destroyed node are PvP zones? So essentially asking, if you have a world boss, is that zone now for all purposes, a free for all, a corruption free zone while the world boss is there?
I don't think so, because you're going to have people rushing to get after the loot or be the ones who are going to get the loot. And so if the people who tap the boss first are the ones who are guaranteed to get the loot because nobody else can otherwise disrupt or interfere, and it's something with that level of restrictive loot, then yeah, it might have to be an open PvP thing so that we give people the opportunity. If, however, it's something that they don't want people fighting each other and they want everybody fighting together as buddies trying to take this thing that's a giant threat to the world down, then maybe they won't do it like that. And it's just that everybody gets a bit of the loot for participating, and you get your dragon scar or whatever for fighting the dragon or whatever.
So it's the difference between a gamer just trying to, game and be as greedy as they possibly can be, and a role player who's trying to, live through a fantasy setting. The classic example that we have from Steven is the winter dragon who causes a perpetual winter in the region that causes the region to suffer perpetual winter. You can't get the services that you need because things are closed down due to the snow. So we should be wanting, the primary incentive of getting rid of that winter dragon should be to get rid of the perpetual winter, not to get all the cool loot. So it should not turn into a free for all zone, because the focus should be on removing the world threat, not on just free for all fighting everybody because you'll be rich afterwards. It's the problem of making RPGs for gamers versus players.
I don't know. I'm very curious. There were a lot of posts in there as well, talking about PvP, PvE, like always, and it's all we'll wait for corruption to come about. That it'll be corruption. Corruption will be the thing that solves all this, but we have yet to see that. So, but I still laugh though when I see a lot of people asking, the ones that want the least corruption available, but then also ask, can we also have partially instanced world bosses? So we get, I don't want it to all be PvP. I get to a point where I win, I quote win. So then you can turn it like lineage, right? So then becomes an instance thing. So I don't have to worry about you ganking me anymore while I kill my boss. I don't plan to be doing any of it. So
I don't plan to be doing any of it either.
we're almost out of time. We got like 4 minutes. I don't know if there's anything else y'all wanted to talk about.
Oh, there was a one funny thing that came up in the past couple of weeks. I went and looked on the career site and see, let's see if they've refreshed this, and it was empty. But it came back, and I think they might have just had their hiring app plugin thing or whatever kind of die on them for a day or something. I was like, wait a minute, I thought they were gonna keep on growing the company. I thought this was supposed to be a big year for growth again, and nothing. But no, that was most likely a technical error. I haven't seen any new posts or anything on the subject yet. I do think I saw a couple of new listings that hadn't been up at the end of last year, so there will likely be some stuff coming in and rolling down the pipe for anybody who thinks they want to work on the project or thinks they know somebody that'd be good for it. But we'll see.
So, Phantom, I noticed that you were talking about Lord of the Rings, playing Lord of the Rings this past week, I think. Were you playing this past
Oh,
week?
I did a little. I've been playing more EverQuest too, the
Okay.
time lock server. But yeah, I jumped back in.
Okay. I'm hoping to play with you next weekend, maybe, or after next weekend, February. I've seen lots of chatter going by on DOP Crew Discord for Destiny 2. That's been pretty steady for like a month or more. How's that been going, Hero?
Destiny 2 has been quite a bit of fun. So it took me a little to kind of understand how their whole season annual content scheme works. It's the annual season is going to be ending soon in the next 3 weeks, and it's not an MMO, but it's definitely a live ops, live service game.
So how big are the groups?
The biggest group you can usually queue up to anything with is 6. That's the max. And while there are open world zones where you can interact with more than 6 players at a time, you're not grouped up with them. It's just there's no PvP in the open field. You're only, working as buddies. So it's limited. Yeah, 3 in basic stuff, 6 in the raids, 4 in the wacky gambit mode where it's like mostly PvE, but you're competing against another team, and every so often you can go across to the other side and try to kill them to slow their progress. It's probably the most fun PvP mode of engagement in the game because it isn't all just PvP the whole time. It's kind of an interesting sort of thing. But I see that now the Witch Queen, the current year-long annual segment, that content will remain, but all of the smaller quarterly seasons, they go out the door. You won't be able to play them again. They will just be a memory. The game advances. I'm fine with that because the next zone looks pretty freaking awesome. And this season, I'm not going to say that this season like really sets up the next set of things, or this annual sort of thing. Like the annual segment, I think, did more than each of the individual quarterly seasons to kind of lay out what the path is going forward up until this final quarterly season, which kind of drives things in some interesting and important ways. But I've been enjoying it and continue to be enjoying it. So that's pretty good.
So I'm saying in chat, it's basically co-op.
Yeah, it's co-op. You can PvP if you want. PvP is actually the one thing that's free. PvP, the open world zones, the hooks to each of the quests. I think the playlist content minus things you can't get into, and the seasonal stuff. That's all free. You don't have to pay anything for any of that. But the quarterly seasonal stuff and the annual length stuff, that all you have to pay for after you do the first mission to kind of get you hooked. So that's kind of the scheme for it. If you love PvP and you love that specific format of it, sure, you don't have to pay a dime. You can do great. You can get some weapons from the paid content that might help you in PvP too. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of people in the DLP crew are playing that frequently.
It's fun
Yeah,
for when you
well-
want to shoot something. It's great.
Yeah.
The story
Yeah, it is.
nutty. But
It is a nutty story. I went back through and watched the entire story of Destiny 1 and the entire story of each annual and season leading up to this point, and the game makes so much more sense now. Like leaps and bounds more sense. And then there were a few other incidents and characters that I kind of read and watched a little more. And it's like, oh, that's all how that happened. I see. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting way that they present everything.
there were two things that just really shut me off from it. One was like every time I would go to, well, we talked about this. Every time I would log in, I'm like thrown into a brand new story that I'd never finished the first one. I don't know how to get back to those. Well, the one it's like it's an ice planet, and you helped me get back to where it was. So just if you're trying to follow the story, it's very hard to understand without a long play session. Like if you sit for 5 hours and play through, I'm sure it's different. But for hour runs. And then the other thing that drove me nuts was like this happened literally 3 times. I started a mission and I would have to get up and do something. I would go cook dinner or something, and I would come back. Well, I'm kicked out, so I'm kicked back to to the login screen, log back in. Well, the missions don't save, so I have to go back through to the very beginning. So you have to complete, and they're not short. They're not
okay.
They're not short either.
The story intro missions that you're talking about, you're right. Those are like an hour plus commitment to get started with them for sure. Most of the content that isn't like the tougher dungeons is on the shorter side. The current stuff we've got right now, the psyops where you battle enemies in the mindscape to then take control of them. There's the one where you have to go on the derelict Leviathan and basically do magic therapy for 3 of your buddies because they're being haunted by their past in an evil magic way, but it's not actually evil. It's just there's some stuff with that. And then you got to be a pirate for an entire season. And that one, I feel like it was kind of weak. They presented some lore and had a weird season ending sort of event. That sort of, and then the one right now, which is the latest edition of the story about the super powerful AI and weapon system, and it has sentience, and we have to recover it again. And I feel like that pattern's happened a few times now, but we'll see what happens going forward with that one. That one's still not over here, so that's stuff to do that only lasts about 15-20 minutes per run. There's stuff that's quicker. There's definitely stuff that's quicker. Dares of Eternity is the game show thing. That's usually like 15 minutes. I'd usually try to knock them down less than that. Yeah, the big face guy.
Yeah, and right above that, Phantom was saying unless he has over an hour to play, he's not going to log in. And I wonder, I think that's, again, a real thing for those of us over 35, families and jobs. You got to have stuff to do that lasts less than an hour, probably.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the point, right? I would if I don't know if I'm going to get a mission that takes only 15-20 minutes, or if it's one that does take an hour, because I'm still new to the game. So yeah, I got to a point, after I had this Europa one that I didn't even know how to get back to. I had to do it 3 or 4 times because I would go do something else and then it would log me out. So it kind of gets to the point where I was, okay, well, I don't know what I'm going to get. So I'm sort of conditioned to not bother logging in unless I know I have an hour to play. Because otherwise, whatever I do, it's not going to save. I'm going to have to redo it anyway. So I don't know, just some feedback, I guess.
Yeah, that's definitely the 5 minutes and then it kicks you out part. That's one thing I will give a lot of love to their space cousins Warframe, that if you're actually playing in solo mode in Warframe and you press the escape button, it just in only solo mode pauses everything. Everything stops. It waits for you. You can come back an hour later and it's just fine. It's just waiting for you to continue. So that is one thing I would like to see for Destiny, especially if you're playing solo, to have it kind of not be off the server, but that the server can just kind of be in an idle state and chill like that for a little while. The one that you're playing in, essentially. Yeah, we'll see. They're doing quality of life changes, so it might come at some point.
One other thing that does kind of concern me about no fast travel is if you only have an hour to play and you have to kind of travel to where your buddies have moved on to since you played with them a few days ago. How long does it take you to meet up with your buddies? I think there is a family summons in Ashes of Creation, so that should take care of that. But
you can ride a horse course.
I'm just saying, is a horse going to be fast enough to get you to where you want to be before you have to log out? You can get there, but then what are you going to do? So
Druids,
I'm just saying it's
Druid circles and wizard spires they need to be in, because
it's all about those science metropolis. If you want to be able to get around where your buddies are at, you move to a science place that's going to be a metropolis, and you set down your route so that way you can do the vassal teleport thing. And all right, you're just where your buddies are. Outside the kingdom, well, I hope everybody does a science metropolis, but that's just me.
But again, EverQuest, I always mention EverQuest, I feel like had a good blend, right? So they did have wizard spires and they had druid circles, but you weren't necessarily teleported right where you need to go. So like Dreadlands was a place I spent a lot of time in through various characters, and to get there, yes, there was a druid circle, but it was like 1 or 2 zones over, so it would get you close, but then you'd still have to run for 15 minutes to get to where you were going. That blend seemed to work very well. And then also, if you were a druid or a wizard, I mean, you could make money off it. It's just another way to make some extra money is by transferring people. So
the West Coast server of original launch Ultima Online, I want to say it was like BBBC travel service. It was one of the most castlist having guilds on the server because they had teleportation runes everywhere, and they had a lot of customers and they had a lot of agents. And so if you needed to get around, well, you have some coin in your pocket, can make do, you contact them, they'll get you where you're going, no problem.
Yeah.
So that, you know, and the teleportation system with the runes and stuff in the game anyway, that was one of the biggest problems with the game, because you would just have PvPers that teleport into the loot room, and when you teleport through, you don't have as much lag as people that get 8 new players joining the already crowded field. And so you just kill everybody before they can even respond, and you take everything off of them because they've already got all the good loot out of the chest for you. And then, you know, they'll make the corpse run, they'll come back, they'll be in the loot room still, that's where they died, and they can try to scrounge up from the scraps and, you know, maybe make out with some stuff, or maybe hang around and hope they don't get hit on the next cycle in an hour.
Yeah, that was how you made money in EverQuest. I would. There were times I would. That's what I did for an hour, an hour and a half. I would sit with a friend who was an enchanter. They would throw up some Kodiak's Endless Intellect. There was some Spirit of the Wolf. Transport you somewhere you need to go. Make a lot of money. And that actually was fun. You also got to meet people, but that's a whole another topic. So. We are now 10 minutes over, so I guess we'll probably start wrapping this up. Like I said at the beginning of the show, for those who are unaware, there is a live stream Friday, dev stream. Tank will be highlighted, hopefully some other stuff. Everybody really wants to know about Alpha 2. I doubt that we'll hear anything about it, but yeah, we'll see what comes. So we'll at least hopefully have some new stuff to actually talk about next Sunday.
Maybe Node 3.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Well, all right.
Maybe they'll even show us, maybe this tank demo is going to be something different. They're going to show us 3 of the archetypes, the secondaries.
You know, I'm really curious. On a similar but side note, is what I'm going to be curious mostly about is whether it's Steven that's doing the demo or not after the last one. So I'm curious. We'll see. There's the real answer of do they listen to feedback or not. So all right, everybody have a good week. We will see you back here next Sunday.
Yep. See you then, everybody. Have a good one.